Ladies and gentlemen, too much networking going on out there. Yeah, good. Good afternoon, everybody. This is one of our regular sessions at AHICE, the What Owners Want session. I've been told on good authority that on stage you're looking at about $7 billion worth of assets, give or take. And they do represent a decent chunk of the hotel investment portfolios here in Australia and overseas. So I'm going to hand over to Nigel, who'll be moderating this session. There is a bit of a time limit. I know it's an excellent thing to discuss here, but you know who they are, and I'll leave you to it, Nigel.
Thanks, Howard. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's session on What Do Owners Want? We do have a distinguished group of people who represent hotel investment here in Australia. Steve Scarrett from Salter Brothers. We've got Marianne Osavani from Eleanor Investors Group, Ross Beardsall, Jones Lang LaSalle, and Grant Alchin Capital Land. So thank you all for joining me here this afternoon. And
pleasure.
We'll try and give you some insights to what these guys want, not what they've seen. We all see the same things. We've got some real strife out there. So what do you want, guys? So we know for a long time hotels have been a great place to invest here in Australia. And that's largely been due to the qualities of the market fundamentals: supply, demand, room rates. But 2020, it has seen a massive shift in that fundamental due to COVID. We all share similar observations. And so as I say, I'm not going to ask you what you've seen. I'm going to ask you, what do you want from hotels as they navigate for revenue through this time? Marianne, you've got a great lens. You've got a great lens into the market. You're in major markets, regional markets. So tell us what you want when you're considering hotel revenue, and how the hotels are dealing with demand and pricing.
Mm-hmm. Well, a majority of our hotels are in regional markets and regional destinations, so a little bit different, and a different lens, as you've said. What we're looking for is holding rate and pushing rate. So we're actually finding there is demand, particularly through those weekend periods where we do have demand through interstate travel, those drive-to markets, which people are availing themselves of, taking advantage of. So we're finding it's not about occupancy, it's not about filling the hotels and just at any rate, at any price. It's about that sweet spot, if you like, including cost efficiencies, which we can talk a bit more about later. But certainly not filling hotels at any price, but at that level where there's reasonable revenue, and at a rate where we're not having to to do damage in the future, I suppose.
It's all about the rebuild, isn't it? I mean, we've all been around long enough where we see, you hold on to the rate. That you don't have to rebuild that in the future, do you?
You just don't need to.
And the other thing too is, why, if people just aren't travelling, but they are going to come to your hotel, they're happy to pay that. Why sell them at that? You know,
Exactly right.
It sort of begs the
demand
question,
is
doesn't
there.
it? You know, Grant, you represent foreign ownership. How do they want it?
I think very similar sentiments. I think the big fear for us is that we descend into a free fall. It's self-inflicted. So demand is down, but demand is down artificially. There'll be a point where it comes back.
Yeah.
At that point, we need to make sure it's not a race to the bottom. So I think we've seen that at different times, and there's a few industries currently, I guess, taking advantage of our situation in terms of renegotiating things at this present moment. You have to take a view for today in terms of cash flow. Everybody does. But to your point, 3 years from now, I mean, you really don't want to be tied to that. So it's a bit of a balancing act.
So what happens? What happens, mate, when you hold on to that philosophy? I mean, we know pricing structures in hotels is quite a complicated thing. There's a lot goes on. There's a lot of different segments. Too much.
Yeah.
So how do you get that message through?
Well, revenue right now is not coming in a flowing wave. It's coming in chunks, right? So obviously there are different ways to get a hold of one of those, and we expect the guys to be doing their best to get hold of those, and there's a price point for those. So we're not going to see no rate erosion. I think that's a pipe dream for a lot of businesses.
Yeah.
In regional, I think it's probably definitely different because we're seeing different demand dynamics there. But outside of that free-flowing pipe is not there. So it's what you do in the downtime that matters the most. And if you're trying to artificially stimulate demand by taking a price point that then forces the rest to follow, we're all stuck.
Yeah. Ross, thinking of revenue.
So looking at revenue, Nigel, it's a very good question, and there's been some great comments here from the panel. It's also looking at how you reinvent a business as we go along this journey. There's no doubt the conference has heard this morning of the journey that we've been on. However, it's looking at where hotels, working with hotel teams, hotel operators, to look at reinventing the business to drive more revenues. And what we mean by that is reinventing, looking at different classes, looking at real estate within the business, looking at where the opportunities are in an emerging, as we're on this COVID coaster, and when we come off the COVID coaster, that we've got opportunities to grow the business.
Give us an example.
An example of that, and it's a good question you asked there, Nigel, if you're looking at reinventing businesses, and to that point is you're looking at the use of conference space, for example. And no doubt you've got good experience in that as well, Nigel, and if you look at conference space that you're working with and how you can take that forward. And there's other opportunities, and just recently I think you'll find on some national media and I think it refers to the Avolo group, was the opportunity of using rooms as office space. So there are opportunities out there. So it's looking at the horizon and looking at keeping on the journey of the COVID coaster as we keep going up.
Yeah, good one, Ross. I'm not sure who's the radio announcer here today. Is it me or Ross? Thanks, mate.
My pleasure.
You're standing me right up. You should chair next to you. Hey, Steve, your thoughts?
Yeah. Look, a lot of good comments said. Look, our hotels are capital city hotels. They're corporate and MICE focused. And I think on the revenue front, we really need to build out our product shelf. So those, once the borders are open, the corporates, they will travel again. I'm really inspired by this MICE event here, this hybrid event that James has done. I think there's a real opportunity for the MICE hotels to do similar. Corporates will definitely want to meet again. They'll want to do it in a safe way. So having this on the product shelf and having it ready to go is a big focus of ours, and we're there in a couple of the hotels already. But we're really proud too of the renovations that we've done in a number of the hotels. And domestic leisure, it will want to do cityscapes just as much as they want to do the regional stuff. So I think if we look at innovating our leisure packages, look at distribution channels that we haven't previously used because they were not the focus for the hotel when the segmentation strategy was more corporate and MICE focused. So bringing in those new distribution strategies, increasing the product shelf, creating greater awareness around how you can have a city escape and what you can enjoy. The restaurant and bars, we've also made a big investment into our restaurant and bars to try and certainly create a point of difference for the hotels, but also for them to be a destination. And with the current dining rules, particularly in New South Wales, 1 person per 4 square metres, that is seeing a lot of restaurant and bars hit capacity, and that's pushing demand, which hotels can capture as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Steve. So, generally we want rates to stay strong. Well, what if they just don't? I mean, Ross, really, you know, we are in a marketplace, and your success is somewhat reliant upon what others do around you. So, give it to me.
Nigel, to give it to you? And to look at that view, it's not necessarily rate. We want volume. It's an MPI strategy. What's your view on taking an MPI?
Hang on, I'm the chairman here.
Oh, sorry,
I don't
Nigel.
answer a question. I just asked them, but I think you're right. Steve,
Yep.
like all hotels, you've been working with the operators to refine the cost structures. You know, you've seen new territory here in those very cost structures. Do you think it's reasonable to expect that with the shaping of costs, that there's a new dawn on what we can expect in terms of top-line performance to deliver the profits that we might have seen pre-COVID?
Yeah, well, certainly next year and the year after, the RevPAR isn't going to be there to the levels it has been historically. So the cost base can't. And I think the first thing, certainly that we're working with our operators on, is setting new profit margins. So the operators have been great in this COVID period of relaxing brand standards, which has allowed us to, to bring costs down. I think working closely with them, we need to determine what adds value and what doesn't, and make sure a lot of costs don't come back into the business. And a big trick behind making sure we've got a northern star to follow there is to set new profit margins. We can't look at the historical KPIs where 70% may have been good, or 72 or 65. We have to look at, what can they be, given the costs that we don't put back into the business. And we also need to innovate the way that we do deliver services. We need to bring in increased automation, increased self-service. I've seen, again, in the restaurant and bar industry, a lot of innovation around the menu. How do you order your meal? How does it get delivered to your table in a COVID-safe environment? And I think as hoteliers, we can take a lot of that into practice now, and bring it back in a new level of customer service that's acceptable post-COVID. Self-service and automation, not necessarily less service. There's a generation of people who are much more comfortable using technology to order, using technology to interact with the venue that they're in, as opposed to the old-fashioned customer service. So we have to embrace that. We have to push for that change. And I think more so collectively, as we do it as an industry, it will become a new benchmark, and then that'll help new profitability benchmarks. And
it's good to hear you say that, Steve, because those that have known me for a long time, I've always been an advocate that the hotel product is a composition of two parts. It's the physical product and it's the intangible product. And we can't just let a time like this, we can't just give up on the intangible product. But I think there is opportunity when we do think of our cost base. Personally, I've seen some amazing opportunity to get enormously granular and really ask those questions on the cost base, or in certain areas of costs that I've probably just never asked before. I probably should have, but we're there now when we're looking at that stuff. And, there's a consensus with the teams in the hotels. Yeah, they want to do something about it too.
Yeah, look, our hotel teams have responded really well to that. We've got Gary Lopez, one of our senior asset managers. He's brilliant in understanding every cost in the hotel. And when he engaged all the GMs on undertaking a plan to look at that, they responded really well. So I think we're going to get support at the hotel level, at the operator corporate level, to really go after these innovations and not just bring things back in because it was done that way previously. So let's all hold hands and move that way together.
Yeah, it's exciting times in some ways, isn't it? What the possibilities for the future. Marianne, given the lower revenue, lower cost model, should this shape the thinking on the value proposition that the guests can expect from hotels?
I think going on from what Steve said, through automation, through technology, which we've accelerated a number of projects, through centralisation, consolidation. Like, there's a lot of back office functions that happen in a hotel on the ground, which is just not necessary. And I think we've definitely seen that. Centralising that, and with the team on the ground actually delivering, that offering, delivering that service to our guests, which is what they're there to do, and focusing all of their time and effort on doing that. I think not, actually, so I tend to agree. It may be different, and in some of our hotels, perhaps there's some small differences. Guests can be quite forgiving through this period, at least now, where things may not be what they were previously, but understanding there are changes, and we're limited, I suppose. We've got restrictions, etc. But going forward, I absolutely agree. I think hopefully we're delivering more, to be quite honest, just in a different way.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to be too overcritical. This industry's been good to me for years, but I don't want to be overcritical of it. But you see other sectors, other property asset classes. We're always a little bit behind on the technology.
We're slow to innovate.
Absolutely.
We are slow.
It's got to change that.
We've got to, and this is the time, huh?
Absolutely.
To deliver that intangible product, deliver the expectation. Ross,
Nigel, thank you.
what do you think?
So just circling back to Steve's comment there, and I just think it's really important for the audience that's actually watching today. There's a lot of general managers out there and operations teams watching this conference today. And I think it's just important to thank them for their involvement in streamlining the businesses as we go along on the COVID coaster. I think it's very important that, there's a lot that goes on in the engine rooms of hotels, and I think it's with operators and also general managers and their leadership teams that we're able to take these businesses forward during these very challenging times.
Oh, I'm looking at Grant. He's got something to say about that. Go on.
Oh, I think at the end of the day, we need to remember we run a very, very simple business. Like, it's not complicated. The core of what we do has not changed since Mary and Joseph were looking for a room at the inn, right? Like, it's not rocket science. In times of prosperity, we add layers of complication, we add layers of expense in the search of that extra 5-10% and those things, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But this is obviously a time where you've got to put a different lens on that. And things that may have been considered great input costs last year, this year will be considered wastage.
But right? Grant, what Ross was just saying, it's a really interesting point, because we sit away from, I certainly do, sit away from the hotels and been looking at paperwork and saying, labour structures, all sorts of things, guys, we can do better, da. But those guys are seeing the whites of people's eyes, and they've been dealing with it, Ross. And I think that's a really interesting point that you raised, because everyone's in this together. There's those that are really the person-to-person dealing with it, and I think your point's really valid. But so is yours, mate. We're not putting man on the moon, or person on the moon. Sorry to be politically. Right.
And I think we prioritise mental health of our GMs and executive teams in any given year, because at the end of the day, we win or lose at the hotel level. I can be a genius, it doesn't matter if the guys are not into it.
So it does beg the question, how hard do you push though? Because there are people at the other end of your push.
Yeah, look, I think pushing is probably not the word at this point in time. I mean, I think to your point, we are having to go together, right? So there's outcomes that you need, there's guidance you've got to give, and you've got to ask the right questions, but there's not a lot of leeway when it comes to someone's ability to handle real rigour in certain conversations at the moment. So I find that when we get something like a large piece of business, like the ADF comes into Melbourne, we fill the hotel, right? First thing I get is a call from the GM, because his whole world has changed overnight. We can then have a conversation about what he wants to do. But the day they leave is not the day to call him to talk about. Do you know what I mean? So
I do.
There's times to do it, definitely. But his outcomes are mine.
I mean, maybe, we talked about the new dawn of the way we do things, new dawn of cost structures. Maybe this is the new dawn of communication and engagement between owners and the people at the hotels. I think the depth of engagement and empathy that has sit behind it.
A general manager's role in today's hospitality world is a significantly lonely role, right? The oversight that is there is probably not as much as it used to be 20 years ago, in terms of having someone to talk to immediately on the phone, ready to go. It's a little bit different. Sometimes the level of bench strength they have in the team around them is not sufficient to have some of the hard conversations. So it's a tough one.
Yeah. Employment structures, Ross, how do you see it? I mean, this is...
It's more of a view of how the audience sees it, Nigel. As we go forward with the labour market, it's how we can look at more flexibility in awards as we go forward, whilst protecting jobs, protecting hours, and allowing businesses the flexibility to be able to return to the new normal.
Yeah, yeah. It's certainly something I've been wanting to ask of owners for a while. If we think about the time that we're in, what we've learnt, but what in 5 years' time do we want to hang on to from this time? What's the one thing that you want to see from this time in 5 years' time? Grant?
It's a common bugbear of mine when I'm in a review with a team. No one in the room was here for the GFC, right? So quite often when you talk about actual downturn and what to do, there's very, very limited knowledge in the room. So glass half full, this is a very expensive training exercise for everybody running our property. So we do need to retain them because they're learning stuff that they didn't know, and it's very valuable. 5 years from now, it'll be very valuable.
Yeah, great point. The people that are going through this experience now, compared to, 5-10 years of, it's just insurmountable the amount of experience they're
Something
getting.
so simple as physical cash.
Yeah.
Right, when we first started to talk about in sort of mid-March, when we were really starting to hit on some of our strategies, none of them were actually cash saving for us. Right, and I had to keep going back saying, guys, that's great.
Yeah.
But the same amount of cash is still flying around. Like, we've got to actually look at that.
Yeah.
And they've never had to worry about it.
Yeah. I think we've
always
seen
been there.
people who typically aren't there at the voice front, like a general manager, or we've seen others step up to the plate, and we've seen some great outcomes from people taking some initiative during these times.
Yep.
Marianne, your thoughts on that one thing?
Look, I think there's a few things. Innovation is one, but definitely looking at the business structure, just rethinking the hotel business, which has been the same for a very long time.
Yeah.
So it can be different. We've had a lot of learnings over the last few months, and we thought we were efficient prior to that, but it's amazing what you can do when you're forced into a situation when you need to look at things differently. So I think it is looking at things differently and challenging it, situation normal.
Yeah. Steve?
Yeah, I think I said mine. I want the guest self-service automation to be part of the formula going forward. Yeah, so which will give us a new profit margin.
When you
at
say
lower-
automation, is that going to mean capital investment?
Yeah. And I think it'll be capital investment that's got a great ROI. But yeah, I'm talking about things like self-check-in kiosks, things like room service all being ordered off the apps like what we see in the restaurant and bars now. Might even be in replace of the breakfast buffet, which is gone for the immediate, might be gone forever. But I don't think we can go to full table service, certainly not in a 4-star or 4.5 star. So there might be some new innovation around how your order's placed and then you arrive to collect it and then back to your desk, back to your table. So things like that, I think, can regenerate the industry, bring up profits, at what might be a lower occupancy going forward.
Good stuff. And Ross, I've left you till last to give you the chance to convince Howard you need the chair next year. So, last word.
Nigel, before you get to that, you're doing a super job in the chair. So we'll just hold that thought. But if you look at the journey we've been on, you look at the one outtake you look at as an industry is collaboration. That's gone right across the umbrella of our business. Whether it be owners, whether it be operators, look how much we talk to each other now and exchange information prior to the events of March.
Yeah.
So out of an outtake, if you're looking, going forward to 2021 and beyond, it's to continue the industry and hotel and operator collaboration.
There you have it. Ladies and gentlemen, the final word from the chairman of the owners panel
Next
year. We thank you for your time. Thanks to the panel. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Nigel. Thank you.
Yeah, take your chair, please. Good. This is flexibility in the workforce. Well done. Good stuff. I try. Very good. That was a good session. Thank you, Nigel. A lot of good learning points there for asset managers, owners, and operators. James is back on stage, talking live with David Udell, Area Vice President for Hyatt in the Asia Pacific, and he's live from Hong Kong, James.
That's right.
Come in. No, he's not.
All right, David, are you there?
No, he's not. We're getting a signal.
Yep, that's a thumbs up. David, good to see you.
Right.
Hey James, how are you? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah. Usually you sit next to us on stage every year at AHICE and make hotel announcements every time you come down.
It's great to see you, and thank you very much for having this hybrid meeting in the Hyatt Regency Sydney. We're very happy to be a part of this.
No, it's great. Thanks for dialing in. It's been actually quite a very easy hotel to work with from a hosting point of view. So, and it's wonderfully renovated by one of our partners, Shape, who sponsored Design In. So that was actually quite good. You've got, speaking of hotels, you've got some openings coming soon, including a fantastic new Park Hyatt that's across the water from us over in Auckland. And you must be getting excited to be able to bring brands like that into markets that we've been discussing for 5 years.
Oh, absolutely. It's listen, we all need good news these days, and the opening of these hotels is great. Actually, today is an auspicious day because we open an Andaz in Xiamen in China, which is a absolutely amazing hotel, and of course, next week will be the opening of the Park Hyatt in Auckland, which is also an incredible hotel, one that's been in the making, but everything we do these days is virtual. So we had a virtual walkthrough of the hotel a couple days ago, and it's stunning. So that will definitely be a great addition to the Auckland landscape. We've got still another 4 hotels to open this year, so I think in total we will have opened about 14 or 15 hotels. So it's been good.
And you've obviously got some more hotels coming in Australia soon with, Hyatt Places as well and Centric. So that's an exciting time bringing more brands into this part of the world as well.
No, it's great. And we listen. One of the interesting things, the great things about AHICE really is the opportunity to speak to so many people that with so much knowledge about the Australasia. And one of the feedback that we received was that you really need to have somebody in Australia, in the Pacific. So joining Robert Dawson, who's there, we had Monica Dubai that just moved there, and she's been very responsible for a lot of the growth that we've had. So she's now based in Melbourne. So we're happy to have her there to help us with our development initiatives.
When it comes to performance, obviously it's a very different time, but you oversee a lot of different markets where you've got hotels in. So which countries are a bit of a shining light for you at the moment from a occupancy and RevPAR regrowing standpoint?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Look, I think we're very fortunate that mainland China has kicked back in May. We finished up July with an average occupancy we've got just about 85 hotels in mainland China now. We had an occupancy of about 57%, which is quite good. And the interesting thing is that some of the hotels that are in the more remote locations, some of the Alilas that we have there and in resort locations are actually doing better than they did pre-COVID, because people want to get out of the cities. They want to explore, sort of off the beaten track locales. And no, it's good. We're definitely, things are looking up there. Yeah, cities like Busan, which are, driving distance away from the likes of Seoul. That's those locations have done well, and no, it's good. We're eager to. We miss the business in Australia, and we're all hoping that things normalize because, from a domestic point of view, there's also that staycation market, which is so important. So.
And you've obviously, Hyatt over the last couple of years is very adapted and changed a bit too. You've added some brands that were from another family member as part of the family that owned the company, and that's obviously exciting. We are seeing those brands expand. We're talking about, your Thompsons and Joy de Vivres and whatnot, and you've actually been able to kind of collectively put all them together around Undas. How's that going, and can we see some Thompsons in this part of the world sometime soon?
Yeah, it's look, there's a lot in it. We haven't launched the first one here in Asia yet, but as I said, there's a lot of going on. I think, look, in general, which is a good sign, is that from a development point of view throughout Asia, there's still tremendous interest. So we haven't seen the momentum slow at all. So these lifestyle brands that are prevalent in the United States, there's a lot of interest. We have this new brand Caption, which is coming out. We have the first one, which is sort of a lifestyle version of a select service hotel, which is the first one that's coming up in Shanghai, which I think will open probably in about 18 months to 2 years time. So we're pretty excited about that.
And when it comes to that lifestyle sector, I mean, it was an area that Hyatt wasn't in really until you did create Undas. So this is really much of a growing segment still for the company globally, isn't it?
Look, I think lifestyle. We're across many segments, but one thing is for sure is that lifestyle and luxury is something that's near and dear to our heart. And I think we're the smallest, as I always say when you and I get together, we're the smallest of the big guys, but the size that we have allows us still to do a lot of bespoke, very tailored developments, which is really important in lifestyle and in luxury. And I think that sort of is a standout for us, something that we really enjoy as a team.
Right across Asia, we've obviously seen, different countries where the pandemic's gone differently. How much confidence are you seeing on the back of people comfortable to travel again in terms of throughout the Asia Pacific region? Are you seeing that comfort starting to resume?
Look, I think yes, I think it is, and again, in certain markets where there's domestic business and people are free to travel, the likes of China, to a certain extent, Japan, Korea, we're seeing a lot of leisure travel because there's this pent up thing. People are tired, obviously, of being locked down at home. So I think in terms of sort of the propensity to travel, it's leisure first. I think as far as groups and corporate, that's going to take a little bit more time. Probably, that won't really kick in until there's clarity on therapeutics or vaccines or things like that. Certainly, the staycation market is big for us. The other thing which is big for us because of our reputation and sort of legacy in food and beverage is a lot of domestic consumption in our restaurants. So Hong Kong, in fact, last weekend, I think it was, something like 9 what we were doing in terms of revenues of, compared to the same time last year, and in a lot of markets where we've really recovered when it's come to F&B venue revenues. The other thing which is interesting, James, and thank you again for giving. I have to say thank you to you and the audience, everyone that's participating in AHICE, is this hybrid meeting concept that we've launched, which is where like you're there in Sydney at the Hyatt Regency with a group of people, and you can be together and enjoy nice food and beverage offerings and the togetherness of course, socially distanced and appropriate in that regard, but then also can be linked to other hotels simultaneously around the world who can also participate in the meeting. So that's something, that's a sort of a new concept. It's something that we're promoting quite a lot across Europe and Asia.
And David, what kind of interest and demand are you getting from that? Obviously, it's at this point, and there's a lot of conferences that were postponed to September, October, November, and then February, March next year here in Australia. So what kind of demand are you getting for the hybrid events already, just having planted it into the market?
It's good. It's been, I cannot quote in terms of revenues booked or whatever it is, but there is quite a lot of interest because people crave for this togetherness. They crave to, to have the kind of interaction like what you're having in your room. I was very happy before this, when the last panel was on, they panned throughout the room. How many people do you have there in the room today?
Well, we've got 150 officially we're allowed. We've probably got about, about 100 or so, just a bit over. So, but the hotel's doing a great job from a distancing standpoint, from F&B standpoint, having packages for morning and afternoon tea. So I don't think anyone in the room is going to be complaining about the F&B. I think it's been phenomenal here. So.
We have some, it's interesting because of course we can do the traditional, interesting F&B catering to a group like you have in the room, but also for this hybrid meeting, we also have like all kinds of offerings that we can deliver to people's homes, actually, like in terms of, bento boxes with tea sets and things like that, all very hygienic. So there's a lot of add-ons, interesting amenities and things that we can do to make this very, very special. So I think, one of the things that COVID has taught us, there's a lot of things that COVID has taught us, but for sure it's about being creative when it comes to looking at opportunities to, drive revenues and profits for the hotels.
And David, before we let you go, what are some of the takeaways been for you from a leadership standpoint during the crisis? It's been a very challenging time and you've had to deal with it over so many countries simultaneously.
No, it's so many learnings, but really, at the end of the day, our purpose is to care for people so they can be their best. So really, if I summarize this, it's really about well-being, about our stakeholders, our owners, who are going through a very, very difficult time, our colleagues, our customers. So it's really about listening, empathy, and of course, moving quickly, being agile, and sort of jumping on challenges and opportunities. So it's been a great learning for all of us.
Well, wonderful. Well, David, thank you for joining us, and thank you, obviously, on behalf of everyone for the service at the Hyatt today and tomorrow.
Pleasure, James. Look forward to seeing you in person next year.
Very soon, indeed. Thank you, David.
All right. Much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Without further ado, Dean Long, please welcome to the stage. Dean, as you all know, is the CEO of the Accommodation Association of Australia. And please welcome Dean. Thank you, Dean.
Thanks, Howard. Absolute pleasure to be here this afternoon for what is my first AHICE. I must admit, I was told great things by Julian, by Simon, by Leanne, by Heidi, by Trent, and by David Mansford, who are all part of AHICE this particular year that's very different for our industry. But it's been an absolute privilege to lead not only a great organisation in the Accommodation Association, but to lead an industry through what has been the most challenging experience and times that we have had as an industry. I must admit, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about what we've done as an association. I think it's fair to say that if you've read anything in HM and Intermedia or any of the other trade publications, you're pretty well versed on what we've been up to. And that goes across all associations, as particularly important given this morning's announcement that, again, we're back on. We're going to work in partnership in unison. I know Michael's in the room today. We speak as regularly as we can to unite every opportunity we can to make sure that your issues are heard in the highest levels of government, but also making sure that you as properties receive the best services and values from both of our organisation. And it's a privilege to be looking forward to hearing Michael's conversation tomorrow as we move through to hopefully getting a unified voice for the sector. So I think that's a really important moment for our sector. I just want to start on something. When we started in March, we as an industry came together. As an association, we started fortnightly calls with the senior leadership group of the board, looking at exactly what was going on. And we pretty much set up a three-step process. One was survival. We knew this was going to be the greatest challenge that we ever experienced. We knew that if we didn't come together and collectively work through those issues, we weren't going to get to the next part, which was to rebuild. And in different parts of Australia, as I look down the barrel of the camera and speak directly to our Victorian colleagues, it's very easy for us in Sydney or for those in Brisbane at the moment to think that everything is A-OK. But anybody who has family members, has friends, has an investment, has any relationship with anybody in Victoria knows that they are going through the most challenging times, not just of their business lives, but of their lives. It was said to me by the Secretary of the Department of Justice that currently those that are currently locked down in solitary confinement in a Victorian prison have greater rights than those currently in Victoria. So I say to you as our colleagues in Victoria, we are with you. We are doing everything we can to make sure that the Victorian government adjusts their roadmap, that they listen to not just the Chief Medical Officer, but making sure they get a wide range of views on health measures to make sure that we have a safe road to recovery. And the Accommodation Association and our directors are 100% committed to making sure that that roadmap is updated so we do actually have an industry in Victoria to talk about in 2021. However, the biggest issue that we've had in Victoria has unfortunately been the hotel quarantine crisis. And this particular moment is one of the things that I'm completely proud of as an association, that we brought together the lead communication experts from across our industry to make sure that they had a united voice. That when we were being attacked in media, whether that be by government, whether that be by talking heads, that the national duty that we did as an industry was recognised, not just by those in Victoria, but around the country. And I think fundamentally where you have the Secretary for the Department of Health brief National Cabinet on some of the great initiatives that our industry has undertaken, whether that be unprompted, unscripted events like providing a cake to a 4-year-old who's in hotel quarantine, whether it be that making sure that as you've completed your 14-day stay in hotel quarantine or hotel isolation, that it's a certificate of completion. Whether that be putting on a full opera performance, just as those at the Sofitel Wentworth did early on for those people that were in isolation. Our industry has stepped up and may not have been recognised by all members of the consumer media. But let me assure you, the association and our partners and our members have done the utmost to make sure that the good work that we carry on as a sector is heard and understood. We've also been fundamental in working with all of our industry association partners, including TTF and a range of restaurant and catering and a range of all associations, TAA and AHA, in advocating strongly for a continuation of JobKeeper. Not just continuation, but also the creation. This is fundamentally a time where the federal government nationalised all private sector to provide welfare to Australians that we never thought was going to be possible. And I think there was a great saying put forward by the Prime Minister at some point that JobKeeper was going to be the bridge to get us through. And thank God they did that. Because without JobKeeper, we wouldn't have teams. We started this crisis with 113,500 people. And as we stand around in this room today or sit or watch online, we currently have 58,000. And that's why it's absolutely critical as an industry that we look after talent. Because when we get to the third stage, which our board has clearly mandated, which will be COVID safe, we're going to need to make sure that we have the right teams, the right talent. And unless we nurture that through, it's going to be a devastating, longer recovery than necessary. But there is a bright spot. Just last week, we had a webinar in for North Queensland operators. Out of that, we had a call to action. Call to action was, if you need people to step up and do the right thing, and you need people to work in your properties, let us know. We've got a program. We can make sure that we can get the youth of Australia into your jobs and move you away from reliant on international students as your workforce. I'm really proud to say that in 3 weeks' time, we're going to be running an intake session in North Queensland from 7 different properties where they currently have 20 vacancies. That is a monumental green shoot. Knowing straight away that our properties are looking to re-employ Australians will be our path to recovery. It will be our path to economic growth, and it will be the future of our industry. The more Australians we can get engaged in this industry, the more success we'll have on changing some of the systemic issues that our industry faces. Whether that be making sure that we get a national framework for unregulated letting, that we address the tyrant that is Airbnb. It was refreshing to see a CEO come out of a startup and say, I got it wrong. Absolutely incredible. Something we haven't seen out of Facebook, something we haven't seen out of Twitter. The question is, will that rhetoric push through, and will Airbnb join us in a national framework to make sure that they are regulated to the same standards that we are? But the more Australians we employ, the more Australians we engage, the more Australians we speak to, the more bullish our politicians will be. It is fair to say that we would have liked to see more. For our partners in Victoria at the moment, we are doing everything we can to make sure we get the right level of stimulus into your businesses. Because if we don't see that, we won't have an industry. And we definitely need, in the end, direct cash support from the Victorian government. In Queensland, we definitely need to see the Premier announce a reopening of the borders. Enough is enough. We can't have a scenario where all of a sudden the Western Australian Premier announces for some particular reason the borders will reopen sometime after March, which happens to be about 2 weeks after a state election. And nor can you see in Queensland the current president of the Labor Party in Queensland announce in the same instance, we've only got 60 days to go, which was 59 days less than an election. Enough with the politicking. Open the borders, get us moving, and give us a clear framework for recovery based on solid health advice that matches the needs of economic gain. Thank you so much, and looking forward to next year's AHICE. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dean. Very good words, thank you. James, please step up. You're going to be talking with Toby Smith, Deputy Chair of the Swire Hotels Group, and should be online coming from Hong Kong as we speak. Welcome, Toby.
Got us?
Hi, James, can you hear me?
I've got you.
Great.
So Toby, thanks for joining in from Hong Kong. Those who don't know Toby was running Swire Hotels from an operational standpoint for a number of years and is now the Deputy Chairman. He's in charge a lot of it, the growth and development of Swire. I actually had coffee with Toby in Sydney a couple of weeks ago. So he's self-quarantining in Hong Kong. It looks a bit nicer than some of the ones here, Tony.
Yeah.
So have you got a tracker on to make sure you can't leave the house or go anywhere?
Yeah, they put a tracker on you, and then you download an app, and just every few days they just ask you to scan the code and just make sure you're doing the right thing. It's a very, very efficient system.
Yeah, I think the WA government could have probably invested in some of those with some of the escapees recently, I think. But there are ways, though, Toby, in terms of, if you look at sort of, especially in Hong Kong, where you've obviously got some fantastic hotel assets up there, doing what you're doing is obviously one way to obviously, make things a little bit easier for some people who are returning home, who are returning travellers.
Yeah, it is. There are ways. I mean, it's a very sensitive topic, and lots of governments are doing different things. And I think for us as an industry, what I think we need is sort of clarity around the roadmap to get out of this. When will testing at airports start in a widespread way? Again, they test you on arrival in Hong Kong. You don't leave the airport until you've had a test. I think more countries should start to do that. And a bit more transparency about under what conditions will borders open up. Absolutely, health and safety needs to come first. But I think the industry overall needs greater clarity around the path to opening up. And I think Australia is the same as any other place.
Now, you were in Sydney for a period of time, and one of the key elements of your visit here was to meet actually a few people who actually are in the room here and discuss opportunities. So you would love to bring your Upper House brand down to Australia sometime soon, given the right opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, both our brands, the House Collective, which is our ultra luxury brand, as well as the East brand, which is the luxuries and lifestyle brand. Australia is absolutely a key target market for us. I think that's probably been one of the biggest shifts in direction, if you like, for Swire Hotels. Up until recently, all of our properties have been owner-operated, also owned by Swire Properties, either wholly or as a joint venture. And more recently, the board has encouraged us now to look for third-party management agreements, and got some great conversations underway and some properties in the pipeline. So Australia absolutely is a key market. We think there's good opportunities for both brands in Sydney and Melbourne, despite the rather sobering STR figures that we saw earlier today. I mean, we do take a very long-term view that Swire Group has been around for more than 200 years. And so for us, we're prepared to take our time to find the right property with the right owner. Yeah, it's certainly a key market for us.
And obviously you said that you've had that transition, away from fully owned and managed into now looking at management agreements. Obviously, that's a big shift from the company that has traditionally been kind of back on the lines of a Peninsula, or even what Mandarin have done for a long time as well, in terms of making sure that you own the asset.
Yeah, I think it was the right thing to do when we started out. I mean, the company is still quite young. We're only 12 years old. And I think we wanted to, obviously working with our own parent company as the owner, enabled us to establish the brand, obviously to minimise any sort of communication issues, and really get ourselves into the market and well known, and build a reputation. And over the last 12 years, we've had inquiries, a number of inquiries, people saying, would you operate this hotel for us? And up until recently, we've been saying no. But I think now it is the right time to expand and to look into countries and cities where Swire Properties themselves may not wish to own property, but where we do want to operate hotels.
And for those who haven't, I've actually seen your East property in Miami. I've been to a conference there as well. So for those who don't know it, tell us a bit about that brand and how well that would fit into the Australian market.
So East is, I mean, they're typically around 350 keys. We've got 3 of them at the moment. We have Hong Kong, we have Beijing, and we have the one you mentioned in Miami, and we've got a couple in the pipeline as well in the Asia Pacific region. So it's targeted, it's luxury lifestyle. It does appeal to the business sector as well, but it's not a dry run-of-the-mill. That space is quite crowded in terms of corporate type hotels. We certainly wouldn't see it as a corporate hotel. The mix of guests, I'm sure you'd have noticed in Miami, is not that of a typical corporate hotel. And we feel that luxury lifestyle positioning does have opportunities in both Sydney and Melbourne, and perhaps other cities in Australia as well.
And if you look at then the House Collective, would you restrict that mainly to like a Sydney opportunity, or are you looking at other parts of Australia simultaneously for that?
I think for the House Collective, which are typically more 100 keys and ultra luxury, I think Sydney and Melbourne would be the 2 most obvious markets for it. I think there's a need for that level of property in both cities. And there's obviously quite a big pipeline in Melbourne, less so in Sydney. So I think both of those cities, the House Collective property would do very well.
And in terms of location, do you have to be in the heart of the city, or are you looking also on fringe areas of Sydney as well, in terms of whether it's a Surrey Hills or whether it's a Bondi or that kind of concept as well?
I mean, typically they are for an East, we would be more flexible about location. For a house, it would need to be AAA location within those cities.
Yeah, and what do you find so appealing about the market? Why for Swire have you got such an important focus on Australia as one of those markets to put the hotels in?
I mean, Sydney and Melbourne, those 2 in particular, are world-class cities, and we want to be in world-class cities. We think we have a world-class product, and we'd love to bring it to Australia. We've got a very strong and loyal customer base of Aussies that come up to Hong Kong and our properties in China, and from time to time Miami as well. And we would love to bring that product to their home market. Yeah,
and Toby, for those who don't know, you have quite a background through Swire as well, through Cathay Pacific as well, and obviously it's a challenging time for travel, but the Cathay Pacific is confident of bounce backs and that kind of thing, and like Andrew Burns from Hello World today said, there will be a bounce back, and there is a hunger for it. How do you see it from just from your experience in travel?
Well, definitely, and it's interesting what David Adele was saying a few minutes ago. I mean, in China, we're seeing record numbers. I mean, the Temple House, which is in Chengdu, and in the west of China in July and August had record revenue, record profitability since opening. And Middle House in Shanghai is also back up to 2019 numbers already. So, and that's just obviously purely domestic travel because, again, there are restrictions of getting into China. So we're confident that there is a pent-up demand. Many of the speakers have said that today already. In Hong Kong, obviously, there's no domestic market here in Hong Kong, bar some staycation business, which we're doing as much as we can to attract. But again, on the restaurant and bar side, up until the recent enhanced restrictions, they were doing fantastic business. In fact, the government's just announced today a further loosening of restrictions, so that again, we're confident the restaurant bar business will pick up for properties in Hong Kong. Occupancy is going to remain a challenge until the borders open, of course.
And obviously, Toby, we're talking about your tracker that you have on your wrist in terms of one of those things. And like you said, with Hong Kong, you have a test, you have to have another test after a period of time. So there are some benchmarks now, aren't there, to get travel moving. And as someone who obviously has a business that is a global business, then how soon do you want some of those to be rolled out, when they can be rolled out?
I mean, yesterday. I mean, it's going to be case by case point in terms of the level of risk. But as I said earlier, I think it's a clarity around the criteria. Under what circumstances? First of all, obviously in Australia, the domestic borders, clearly that will come first. But under what circumstances will those corridors, those bubbles open? Is it a certain number of cases per capita? And what sort of tests will be required? I do think there is an opportunity to do more in this, for, as I say, test on arrival, test again on day 5 or day 6, and perhaps reduce the quarantine period if those tests are consistently proving negative. And if you're coming from a safe territory. I mean, Hong Kong's done remarkably well. It's, I think, just under 5,000 cases and less than 100 deaths of a city, a very densely populated city with a population of 7.5 million. So we'd love to see Hong Kong be on that bubble with Australia as soon as we can.
Yeah, well, you've got to come and get some deals done in Australia, so we need you back in Australia fairly quickly, don't we?
Yeah. Well, I'll be back at Christmas definitely. So come what may. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, Toby, thank you so much for the chat, and thank you for dialing in on AHICE and giving us some unique thoughts on what would be some amazing brands coming into this country with the right opportunity.
Well, it's a great pleasure. It's really great to be attend my first AHICE meeting, and definitely look forward to being there in person next year, I hope.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
No. Yes, good. Karen, yes, please. Michael, Andrew, Mark. This is a fabulous panel coming up on stage. They're always looking for deals, so anybody that's got some properties they'd like to talk to, you've got your cream of the crop here today to help you.
I'll be staying here.
So Arno, Mellekamp and Andrew, Karen, Mark and Michael are going to be talking about real estate investment outlook, which is going to be pretty interesting, I would say, over the next 2-3 years. Over to you, Arno.
Thank you, Howard. What a great deal of information we received today. A lot of data, a lot of insights, shared experience from our panels, our speakers. Hopefully they will help our audience today and the people online attending the conference today to navigate and have a better picture of what's happening on the market. Now, what does it actually mean on transactions and on the capital markets? What the current context impact the appetite of hotel investors on our market? Traditionally, and especially over the last 10 years, Australia has been a pretty good destination for investors when it comes to the hotel asset class. Investment or sort of long-term investment. We are lucky today to have a panel of experienced people here. We have like heavyweight people in the transaction services industry here that can. We would love to have your view here on what has been happening in the last few months, what's the outlook, or clearly some sort of prediction based on your observations. And maybe more as a general topic, maybe starting with you, Karen, how do you see things generally, and then we can get in depth into specific questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously this year is, it is unprecedented, and the pace of change that we saw in that first quarter really obviously, caught everybody offside and has had a material impact on the investment market, it goes without saying. And the focus of, global investors, national investors has been on what, their own backyard and managing the portfolios that they have in play. So really, obviously, we've seen a significant slowdown in the investment market this year. We've seen about $350 million worth of deals. Most of the deals that have occurred had started pre-COVID, and we've seen very few post-COVID asset sales. And that's sort of where we're at. As we move forward, I mean, obviously we've seen significant amounts of government stimulus, be it from, in terms of regulation of the banking sector, obviously the introduction of JobKeeper and the extension of JobKeeper, as well as the changes to HIGA. And that's really just kicked the can down the road. And we are expecting in 2021, we'll see a number of that stimulus unwind, and we'll start to see more activity.
Very good. Andrew?
Yeah, so look, just picking up on Karen's point there, I think that when that stimulus unwinds, some of, I think, maybe what are the stresses that are existing for out there at the moment for our clients will become. I think what Karen's alluding to is maybe a bit more distress when there's some of those cost mitigators fall away, and I think that's what no one's looking forward to that, but I think that's what we have one eye on, down the track this time next year, certainly, and maybe slightly sooner. And I know we'll touch on some other manifestations of that about capital sources and those sort of things, but I think everybody's got a similar view about the time frame for this.
Mark, do you share?
Thanks, Arno. Look, the investment market's been effectively frozen for 3 or 4 months, and good news is I think it's starting to thaw out. The volatility we've seen this year in trading markets is now starting to see some stock come onto the market. So there's a lot of conversations behind the scenes with owners as to what direction they're taking with their assets. So I think, I know in the next few months there's some high quality assets coming into the market, and that'll be a very interesting test post-COVID, where things sit in terms of depth of appetite for assets, but also where values and pricing sits. So that we'll go through that price discovery type assessment in the next few months.
Yeah. Transitioning with Michael, how do you see that? What's your sentiment and your contact in the market right now?
I hope I'm not going to have to go last every time, because then I'll just have to nod my head and move on to the next one. No, look, I agree with what's been said. Otherwise, I think there's different buckets of buyers around at the moment, and then interestingly, with our market, the sellers are probably different to some of the other international markets. A lot of people talk about how conservative our banking system is, and it is very conservative. If you compare it to the United States, where some of our buyer clients are looking at opportunities and they're saying we're experiencing 30, 40, 50% discounts. It doesn't happen here, and it's not going to happen here, but it's much easier for an owner with a non-recourse series of debt tranches to hand back their 10% of the equity that they've got, let the mezz pieces fall away, and then the senior debt recovers their money. In this case, we've got quite fragmented hotel ownership all around Australia, and mostly private individuals, and even if they're kind of corporates, and I don't want to pick on any, but M&L, YTL, they're corporates, but they've still got a family or a person at the top of that tree. Ultimately, every dollar that they lose of equity in a trade comes out of their own pocket. So I think it's much more focused on maintaining those assets as long as possible. And when you get a crisis like this, nobody wants to be the person that sells first and maybe loses some of that equity out of their pocket, and I think that there's a bit of optimism that maybe they can hold on and trade through it and move on to the next cycle.
So we've heard the wait-and-see approach many times today. Is that what is most likely to happen in the next quarters, I guess?
I think for the rest of the year there's going to be a bit of that. There's a lot of discussions going on with different buyers and sellers at the moment who are interested to trade things, not that interested in talking about discounts, at least on the seller side. But I think, as the guys and lady have said, there's stimulus measures. It's not that publicised around the place, but I read something that there's about the entire economy of the United States has been promised in stimulus measures all around the world. So it's a lot of money to wash through, and I think once those stimulus measures in Australia start to wear off a little bit, and once Team Australia frays at the edges a little bit with some of the banks, and there's some pressure on the banks to deal with some, there's going to be technical breaches that most people are going to be suffering with interest cover and loan to value, but it's when serviceability stops and when some of that debt is not being serviced, they're going to have to do something about it, and I think that's probably 6 to 9 months away when that really starts in earnest.
Which brings us to the next question, which is more around who is most likely to invest, domestic versus international, overseas investors, how easy it is to inspect a property right now or in the coming month, and what's the profile? Real estate, private equity, shorten holding period.
Yeah, look, we run four on-market campaigns at the moment this year, and what I can say is there's a significant level of inquiry. Inquiries there, whether it's that people are sitting at home in lockdown and have nothing else to do and therefore kicking the tyres over the assets, remains to be seen. We've also seen strong levels of bidding. So there definitely is money out there. It's just whether or not that capital is willing to move now or is going to wait, as we say, we're talking about whether or not this distress is going to come through next year, and certain groups are looking for that level of distress.
We've got a slightly different view on that. I know we've got a couple of significant assets interstate, and we haven't pulled the trigger on those campaigns. And I'm interested in my fellow panelists' views on that. But we haven't done that because we haven't felt as readily confident about people's access to viewing those things. And this conference has been a great example of how you can circumvent some of those challenges. But I think our view has been around waiting until there's greater border easing, and also that might tie in as well with maybe just a change to the sentiment. The capital that we're talking to is still looking for Michael Simpson's the discounts that Mike's talking about overseas. They don't exist in the market at the moment, so we need a bit of that sentiment to wash out before we go too headlong into a couple of campaigns.
Okay.
Yeah. What we're seeing with the various campaigns we've got in the marketplace is there's quite a big weight of capital actually just waiting on the sidelines ready to deploy. It's more when the right opportunity presents itself, and certain quality of asset in the right locations. But there's, as Michael touched on previously, there's really sort of two pots of buyers. We've got the very long-term family offices and private investors, high net worth individuals. They're looking at 5 to 10 years. They're just viewing it as this crisis as an opportunity to get into a market, say Sydney, that's usually extremely difficult and tightly held, and not necessarily expecting big discounts, but a reasonable price. They're looking at things like discounts to replacement value, price per square metre, different metrics, than private equity and some of the new funds that are out there looking to deploy capital as well, which are more numbers based, internal rates of returns and so forth. So the money's there. It's these opportunities are just emerging now for the high quality ones in the Sydney, the Melbourne, Brisbane CBDs.
How do they basically put that in the equation? Obviously, the extra supply coming on the market in the next 2-3 years, and obviously it's going to impact the recovery or the slower recovery. if you have like a 5 to 6 year holding period for a private equity group, sort of a buying now is a bit of an issue, right? So is that affecting the timeline as we discussed before, or?
I think it's maybe affecting the where they sit in the capital stack. So I think it's probably more, private equity, but is it pref equity? Is it some form of debenture note mezzanine piece that sits there that might have a shorter lifespan but participate, more readily in the exit? So I think they're the sort of discussions that are probably more likely to be happening over the next 12 months. And we're encouraging those discussions. I think if people can realign some of their the capital stack ahead of some of those other challenges that we're all flagging, then I think that's probably an astute thing.
Yeah. No, we're seeing also, just adding to that, new funds emerging to that point on the capital stack, recapitalising existing debts, particularly interested in large portfolios, quasi-equity, etc. So that's the deals that we see coming up may not necessarily be just single asset deals. They could be M&A deals. They could be playing more on the recapitalisation of debt piece as well.
I was about to ask on that M&A activity, would that COVID situation would accelerate further consolidation in the market when it comes to real estate, well, pure real estate and or operating platform, which is more like a global conversation, not necessarily Australia driven, but
I think
with
to
smaller
come
players.
back to the point before, ownership is quite fragmented in Australia. I mean, you take Brookfield owns 346 hotels in the United States and Canada. We don't have anyone like that here. So can it can, but it's very kind of individual asset specific. And I think probably to your point, Andrew, we're probably more likely to see some of that capital look for places in debt, not equity, to recapitalise that. And again, given our laws here, we don't have much of a loan to own opportunity here. So I think it'll be expensive debt for some of that on the portfolios that are in real distress. But I'll be surprised if many of or put it this way, I don't think you're going to see Jerry put his whole portfolio up for sale because he feels like doing something else tomorrow. So I think there's not going to be a whole lot of portfolio sales because of that.
Just on that point with debt, obviously we're finding it extremely hard to get low price debt. There's always debt out there, but much more high priced, and the big four banks are not that keen on hospitality transactions on the deals we've got in the market. The lead bidders are really all cashed up. They're intending to buy that with all cash deals and leverage it up in the new year when hopefully the debt markets improve in terms of that pricing.
If you look at what happened post-financial crisis, the marginal spread over the base rates blew out by a couple of 100 basis points, and in some cases more in some markets. But after a couple of years, it normalised. So anyone who's sitting on some decent enough tenor on their debt should take a deep breath and not worry about that, because those spreads will blow out. But history's shown us that they do narrow again once the market normalises a bit.
Very good. Karen, on regional opportunities, we've heard some pretty good news. I mean, at the back of school holidays, and the regional Australia is benefiting from that. How does that impact the attractiveness for that sort of properties in those areas?
Yeah, look, I mean, regional tourism's doing extremely well. I mean, if you look at certain, particularly the 2-hour drive market out of Sydney, not Melbourne, but you're looking in that interstate travel, we're seeing some really strong numbers in those locations. I think the question comes into play, that is, how long is that going to last for? And that's the bit that people are unsure about, and whether that's going to drive additional investment remains to be seen. I think we've also got shifts within the tourism market, which we're yet to get our head round, both at the global level and at the national level. In 2020, the millennials were due to become the largest part of the travelling public. Now, this is the first time Australia has been in recession. Many of the young people in Australia have never experienced a recession. How is that going to play out in terms of travel and spending patterns? And similarly, how are the baby boomers going to react to the health crisis? Are they going to want to go overseas? They were heading overseas a lot. And then are they more likely to want to travel and stay within Australia? Australia. So I think some of those factors are yet to play. I think over the medium term, the regional markets and leisure markets will fare well. I think international travel is probably going to remain quite expensive. So yes, but does it mean that I'll be sticking my money there? We'll see.
I'm sticking my money there. I think I think some of these things are habit forming. So I actually think that you look at 2-hour drives. Karen's talked about them, Hunter Valleys of the world. I mean, the facilities that are in these places that are being seen now by people who haven't been to some of those areas. The money that's being invested in there, I've got a sense that the same sort of lever that kicked off, the revenue surge in those areas is not going to be turned off just because international borders open. I think there's some habits that have been formed there that will have some longevity to them. So I'm long regions.
Excellent.
Yeah, well, certainly regional markets are a good investment story. If we define regional as cities like Newcastle, Wollongong.
What are you selling in Newcastle?
Canberra.
I was going to say, where are we going now?
Nothing, Michael. But so look, I think if a quality asset came up in those markets, that they would be highly sought after, high interest rate, customer representation. But really, if you look, well, from our experience, when you look at the major investors, as you come into the bottom of the cycle and the cycle turns, they tend to all want to come back to, not all, but a lot want to come back to the core markets. So Sydney CBD, or Sydney as such, the Melbournes, the Brisbanes, but we're finding most of the interest, the actual investment appetite when people are calling up to discuss their needs is Sydney. What have you got in Sydney that's coming up? So.
Do you see some appetite for investors to be part of joint venture partner for new developments with or without a brand? And if there is a brand in place, would that be too early, or would they prefer to be involved in that whole negotiation or process with a 4H?
I find joint ventures in hotels that are not subject to a lease to be quite challenging, because invariably different parties have got different views about how to run this living, breathing, operating business, how many staff to have, service levels, capex, all of those things. And so it makes it quite difficult. So I think from an equity side, keep it simple. I think it's easier to trade stuff than take on a joint venture partner, because unless you're very much aligned both culturally and with your investment objectives, you're going to find it very hard to get on with someone when you start having arguments about how many staff you have on and whether you should, spend the money on that, or any other of the spectrum of decisions that you make with an operating asset.
Yeah, I mean, I heard Queensland Treasury had the idea to potentially invest in tourism assets as a way to help the out of the recovery, which I think speaks to the point of, if there's some joint venture partners, just shouldn't be in tourism and hotels. So yeah, I'd be of the same opinion.
Yeah, no, it's pretty risky business, not knowing your partner. We briefly touched distressed assets, and maybe it's a bit early, but how do you see those potentially coming by the end of the year and becoming like the targets of tomorrow?
I mean, it depends on the capability of the owner, and their ability to have their cash reserves. I mean, I think you're already seeing there's some privates who are, particularly of smaller properties, where they just haven't got the cash to burn, and there's been a significant amount of cash burn, even with JobKeeper and with the ongoing border closures, and some people are old and tired and don't want to deal with this again or rebuild that business again, and I think you'll see more of that come, and then obviously the banks will start to move on certain assets. I think in the market there's a lot of first-time entrants. Banks are showing will favour those owners who have the ability to have a track record of trading out of a downturn. And then we've got the whole question of the development projects, which you're going to have a development project a new hotel open in a market which has got a very different demand environment on the basis of what it was. The financial feasibility was predicated, and I think that those projects are going to really struggle.
Thank you, Karen.
I think if you look at what happened during financial crisis, which everyone says is an economic or financial event as opposed to a health event, but there were a number of borrowers around the country that were delinquent, and not just around the country, around the world. There was that great expression, extend and pretend, talked about extending people's debt, but in actual fact, to an extent, that saved the world in a way, because if you tip everyone or 50% of people into the laws of insolvency to deal with their breaches, it doesn't help the banks, it doesn't help the market, it doesn't help any of us. So I think we're going to see there is some violent dislocation coming to kind of earnings, or it's already here. But in terms of how that plays out, I think banks, and obviously there was a Royal Commission as well that forced banks to be a little bit more mindful of some of the customers. But I think they're going to be as orderly as possible to make sure that it's not a repeat of the late 80s, early 90s, where you're tipping tranches of hotels onto the market with a small pool of buyers and too many. It's simple supply and demand. If there's too many assets to buy and not enough buyers, the price is going to capitulate badly.
And the metrics obviously have been changing. We can't really use those cap rates, limited comparables this year. What's the new metric then? Are we back to...
How far out are we looking?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, 2023, 2024, something like that. But I guess, just to pick up on Michael's point about the GFC, I mean, the big difference now is that, we had debt there with margin at 6 to 8%. We've got debt now at 2 to 4%. So we're talking about a vastly different environment. So if you can access debt, this is a better time to be being strategic about what you're doing with your portfolio hygiene. So I think there's, I'm maybe making myself more positive about people's ability to manoeuvre around, that chessboard a little bit differently this time around. I hope that's the case.
Thank you. We've got another 30 seconds for the last.
Just very quickly, I mean,
Yeah,
banks don't want to be owners of hotels. Even in the GFC, I can only think of about half a dozen hotels that were actually in administration. This time what will happen is most likely it'll be bank-guided sales behind the scenes. So you'll see properties come up for sale, but banks are highly recommending to their clients to rejig their portfolio or... Anyway, we'll see over the next 6 months.
I think we're reaching the end. Thank you very much for joining today, guys, for your time, and thank you everyone.
Great session.
Thanks,
Thank you.
We've got to play the trailer for Wayfair while we bring out the drinks.
Hi, I'm James Wilkinson and I've been a travel editor for over 20 years. On this show, we're going to take you to some of the world's most amazing destinations, from the big cities to the great regional areas. We'll go inside some of the world's best hotels, bars, restaurants, museums, airports, and much more. Welcome to Wayfarer.
New York is always growing. Every year we would need to redo the photography.
Cheers. Welcome to Brooklyn.
What fabulous madness it really is.
Yeah.
But from Brooklyn, we get that view every day.
You walk in here, you get this incredible view, and you feel like this could be your apartment.
Sounds good, let's do it.
Oh yeah, the walkability of this area is pretty amazing. We've got multiple museums in this district that you can get to on foot.
Spending money today, investing time and resources today that we won't see any benefit from for 4 or 5, 6, maybe 10 years.
Yeah.
This is the birthplace of modern jazz, gospel, urban blues, and house music. What more can you say?
And it's one of the most unique luxury experiences that you'll have in one of the most extraordinary places in the world.
Well, a little change of plans. James is back on stage, but this time with Mark Bullock instead of his boss. Is that correct?
Thank you.
Please.
All the places we can't travel to at the moment, we thought we might want to watch that. Hope everyone enjoys the drinks. We've got some Match Point Rosé, and we've got some beer from White Bay, which you can basically see out the window straight across in Roselle. So very excited about that. We're trying to dial in with Katerina, but I think we're having a couple of tech issues. So until she comes on, I thought we would bring up Mark Bullock. And Mark, many of you know Mark. Mark's moved from a development role into heading up the Australian business unit for Radisson Hotel Group, and has gone to grow the business in that role already, and you've got 7 hotels now coming in Australia and New Zealand. So tell us about some of the properties you've got coming up.
Yeah, thanks, James. Look, 2019 was a breakout year for us in this region. It had been 20 years since we'd had our last signing within the region, and there's various factors that led to that. But we hadn't had a property in New Zealand. We signed 5 hotels in New Zealand. 1 or 2 are coming out of the ground as we speak, so that's very exciting for us. And it was also, the first Radisson Collection brands, our premium brand, outside of Europe, Middle East and Africa. So the Blue Mountains and Queenstown, which we think are 2 great markets to release this brand under a boutique type structure. So, very exciting. We've said a lot about our Radisson Red brand in this forum and other forums over the last sort of 3 to 5 years since that brand came into existence. We have a signing in Perth, which was announced in November 2019, and also one in Queenstown also. So it's very exciting. It's good for Peter Tudhope to have some new toys to play with as the head of operations. So, I think there's real energy for the team to continue growing.
There's been quite a few changes for the company in terms of everything from name changes to ownership changes to listings and everything else. So it's an exciting time, I guess, for the company, isn't it?
Look, it is. As over the last 5 years, there's certainly been some disruptions, and that's purely based on the ownership. We've gone from being a privately family-held company through our US entity to being owned by H&A. We know the story about H&A, and now we're owned by Jingjiang International, which is the world's 2nd largest hotel conglomerate. Oh. And we have huge targets to meet, and Katerina's on the screen now. And it's a big task for us all, being led by Katerina in the region. So we're very excited, and this is the whole structure of the new business unit.
Well, we've got Katerina here now joining us live from Singapore. So Katerina, thank you so much. We grabbed Mark up here to give us a bit of a heads up while we were dialing into you. It is an exciting time for you, having 7 hotels in this part of the world coming. Like Mark said, the first time in 20 years that's actually happened. So exciting for Radisson Hotel Group in Asia Pacific simultaneously.
Yes, it's very exciting times, and you know, COVID has not allowed any of us to rest. So, I mean, I just think that there's 3 things that we've really, I'd say, seen in this whole pandemic. And the first is that it has really given us the opportunity to focus on what really matters. And of course, that starts from not just guests, so making sure that their health is taken care of, also us, employees, and everyone working in hotels, but also the shareholders. So I don't think we've ever been in such close communication with shareholders. I mean, there are weekly calls in great detail. When I say we track daily what movements are happening in our hotels, it's really that level of detail. The second thing is that it's really widened our resources. And I'd say that's allowed us also to share best practices in a way that we've never done before. When I say widen resources, today I'm on a call with you here in Sydney, and yet I'm sitting in Singapore. So the same way that I can access someone in my team traditionally, I can now access someone anywhere in the world in the company. That's just given us an incredible ability to bring in expertise and know-how and fixing everything. Could be something very specific at a hotel all the way up to strategic issue at our corporate office. And just, you know, someone could be, when you're on Zoom, someone could be next door to you, or someone could be on the other side of the world, Buenos Aires. So that's been incredible. And everyone today is a Zoom staff. So what does that mean? When we find something good and we've got a best practice, we immediately are able to share that. And it's actually not just able, the way to do things. Everyone is out there trying to share the best practices. I'll use an example of how not only Radisson, I think some of our other competitors out there, we've partnered together. So we developed very quickly safety protocols for our hotels. They were a 20-step process for safety of guests and operations, and also another 10-step process for events. We immediately went to WTC and shared those best practices along with Marriott, Hilton, and IHG, and actually helped them develop protocols. Why? So that we can get the international travel back on track. So developed in-house best practice and immediately saw how we could share this with the world, with our global industry, because it's not just affecting us. We're all going to benefit. We can all work together. And that, again, came out of being able to develop something locally and then share it very broadly. And then the last thing I'd say is that it's enabled us to increase really just speed and efficiency. And it's kind of shocking how much more we can do with technically less resources. Because corporate, we're all dealing with people who are working, being paid less to do more. I mean, that's just the truth of it. And yet somehow efficiency is still actually increasing, and we're able to achieve even more than ever before. So lots of learning. Sounds like it's going to be a bit of a long way run up in Australia, but to get back to where we were pre-crisis levels. But there are also some really positive signs coming out of China. Some of my counterparts and industry peers have shared already. So it's not all doom and gloom, but it's definitely laser focus on what we're doing to be able to stay on top.
So, Katerina, when I was at one of Carlson's conferences in Minneapolis, I think I'm going to say about 6-7 years ago, when the Radisson Collection and Radisson Red were both launched simultaneously into the market worldwide. It's interesting. They're now your 2 hottest brands at the moment in many countries, and they were the hottest brands back then too. But it has been a journey for bringing those brands in to a company that had traditionally been a master 2-brand company when you look at sort of Park Inn and Radisson. So it is obviously exciting to now be able to grow those brands, isn't it? Having watched Red go all the way around the world and have some very successful openings.
It really is, and right now we're seeing both of those brands are hot brands, as you said, and Mark's done a great job of bringing them also to Australia, so they're both brands that we have in our pipeline. But I can share live out of China, because I think China is a bit of the bellwether for the rest of the world now. So the virus came to them first. They've managed to figure out how to manage it first, and they're coming out of the cycle in our industry first. So we're seeing big growth in both those brands in China. So we've just, we're working on something really big in Shanghai for one of those 2 brands. And in the year to date, we've already signed a beautiful Radisson collection. And we've already got Reds under the pipeline. Basically, we've been able to get a franchise operator who's an affiliate of ours to grow our brands in China very quickly. So year to date, we're tracking already 27 deals in China, which is more than we signed in many years combined before. And that's just a small fraction of what's there to do. So yes, those brands will become very prevalent in China and across the region, because that's going to be, again, as much as China's now in a bit of if the borders are up, but eventually that will still be the travel engine for our region. So our strategy is to get our brands into all those key markets, and then those travelers will be familiar with them when they travel elsewhere. Again, with our team in Australia, Mark leads our team, we're definitely focused on very good local teams to build that round up as well. So those are two brands which we'll be seeing more here.
Now, when it comes to, I mean, the brand in terms of Radisson Red in particular, it's obviously into that segment right now, which is such high demand, isn't it? When you look at sort of the lifestyle select service and the blueprints of what was done with the brand, or should we say red prints of what was done with the brand all those years ago when it was created. It's interesting that those concepts were great then, they're great concepts now, and it's markets are sort of now ready for them, aren't they?
I think so. I mean, if anything, the last 6 months have expedited trends that were already there. We've already been looking at empowering guests to be able to do their own check-in, check-out. There's only one more incentive to do it now. Simply don't want to be in contact with other people. So touchless technology, everything. In fact, the backbone of Red is something that's become part of our company. So technology enabled. Emma is our big major change in the company, which is a very big investment of a technology company that will be able to enable us to really deliver the seamless technology-driven service to every single guest. What more important? It's so important to be able to do that now. But again, I think that whole lifestyle element and being able to empower the guests to bring in the services they want and to not participate in services they don't want, it's just industry-wide now. So in a way, the elements of Red are still expressed in that brand, very much so. But I'd say they've also become very much part of every single one of our brands as well.
And in terms of what you're doing with the Radisson master brand too, obviously a lot of opportunities with that, where we're seeing that growth. I was talking to Mark about before about the Radisson brand growth as well at the same time in terms of the potentials for Australasia, South Pacific, just on the Radisson brand, on Radisson Blue as well.
Radisson is well known, has a very good reputation, and we've been operating in Australia for 22 years since the Flagstaff Gardens Radisson opened. So in Australia, we have a very good brand reputation, and it's the core brand. Other than Radisson Red and Park Plaza, all of our brands do have that Radisson accreditation, and it will continue to build on that. As you've seen, Radisson Collection, we're in the process of launching a soft brand, which will also include the name Radisson. And that will be able to enable hoteliers who have hotel and don't have access to a big system, and the benefits of being part of a big brand, which are more prevalent than ever now. So that will also enable us to bring that Radisson brand, the system delivery, and the accreditation, and all the best practice and know-how to other hotels as well that will be able to convert.
And if you look at sort of, we've got, Mark on stage here, so we can sort of ask the question to both of you at the same time. You've added 7 hotels the first time in 20 years. What's your next target over the next 3 or 4 years? How many more hotels can you see in this part of the world in terms of strategically? So we're going to put him on the spot now, so you're here and you can tell him in front of everyone.
I'll be nice. I'll let Mark answer, and I'll tell him if he got the answer right.
We're going through planning for our new 5-year plan at the moment. So, 2020 was a bit of a speed bump that we didn't see coming. But, we still have our 2020 targets that we have to achieve, and we're working feverishly towards those. And by growing the team and bringing on Rafa and Ben to assist in that growth, it's certainly flushing out new opportunities for us. So, I think the sky's still blue for us. We have a commitment to invest in this region, and we'll continue to grow.
That's great. And I think, Katerina, if you look at an Asia-Pacific standpoint, you've actually been opening some phenomenal resorts all through Asia that I've been noticing on Pete Ferran's Instagram, which is all through Vietnam, through Thailand. You've got the Maldives, you've got some beautiful properties coming online now. So from a resort expansion, obviously it is going very well for you.
It really is, and the timing couldn't be better, because if we all look at the future, resort and leisure travel is going to be absolutely the driver in this region. I mean, I'm of the view that we should also be looking at new segments growing in demand. I mean, what about resort hotels with a home office attached? Because nowadays anyone can work from anywhere. So I think we should also be looking at how do we convert. It's kind of retroactive. Yes, growth in resort hotels, but we also should be offered a seamless business environment there, so that people can go there, spend time with the family, and whoever's working can work from there peacefully with excellent Wi-Fi. We've just teamed up with Zoom to do Zoom rooms where you can You can basically connect to anywhere in the world, any other conference, a little bit like this conference with Zoom. So we're going to continue to innovate and look at ways of carrying over this new normal, because it's not going to change. Things will be systemic change. So yes, I'm glad you noticed Maldives. I can't wait to go. I saw the property under construction, but it is open, and it's doing very well, considering that it's open in the middle of this of the pandemic, and it's a beautiful property.
Well, thank you so much for dialing. I know you were very eager to come to the event in Melbourne earlier this year when we were going to do it, so we'll have to make sure you come to the next one. But thank you so much for your first time at AHICE and first time giving us an outlook as well like that at AHICE. So thank you very much for dialing in for us today.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to be there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cody.
And thank you to Mark Bullock.
Might as well stay happy.
Yep. Robert? Robert? Leanne? Hello? Simon? Welcome back. This is the final session of the day. Just one important thing after this one, though. So Robert's going to be talking to Leanne, Mark again, Simon McGrath, and also Sean Hunt from the Gold Coast, I assume a Marriott on the Gold Coast. So welcome to everybody. Robert, over to you.
Thank you, Howard. Hi, Sean. How you doing?
Hey, Robert. I'm well, thank you. Greetings from the soon-to-be JW Marriott Gold Coast. So can you guys see me okay?
Yep. We were just debating if you were going to let us talk. The good news is I'm not going to talk as much on this panel. I was with a load of competitors earlier on, so I had to drown them out. You'll understand. So I want to hear from you. Mark, Leanne, and Simon and Sean up on the Gold Coast, all clients of ours actually, somewhere in the world. So I have to be doubly nice. I think the last 6 months of being within a hotel operating business would have been interesting is one word, confronting is another. An incredible place to be. For a lot of us, myself included, we just got less busy, and less busy means less money, and that brings some problems. But my guess is you all have got busier as you've confronted something that none of us expected. We do want to look forward, but I do want to hear a little bit about what you've been through over the last few months. So if we go back to February, we were reeling from bushfires, hoping very much that didn't repeat itself kind of at the end of this calendar year. And I was at an opening of a Pro-Invest Southbank Holiday Inn Express, and there was a board meeting, and at that point, early February, we're talking about COVID's a China problem, and we're talking about looking at, well, what segment of business for each of our hotels is Chinese. We're probably going to lose that. Tour groups, not a disaster, lower yielding business, clearly not good news, but strong domestic market, we're going to be okay. And incredibly quickly, we move into something that was obviously far more profound. So when did it become clear that this really was very different and your budget for 2020 was kind of long out the window? Simon, you're closest.
Look, sometime in March, we had some insight from China. Again, like most, we thought that it was a China issue, and then it was quickly apparent here. And it was probably when the government started placing restrictions on people, not something we'd felt before. And that sort of really woke you up as to you had to move very quickly and nimbly. And you very quickly had to, it was quite chaotic. And as a leader, you really had to, it wasn't so much commercial. It was really caring for people. It was owners, employees, partners, suppliers. You know, people were in distress very, very, very quickly. So that sort of became the focus, to be honest. The commercial reality of it came sometime later. It was the shock that had to be dealt with as a leader.
Yeah, I think there was a scramble phase where everyone was trying to assess exactly what this looks like. When did you start getting, input from corporate down into the region? Did you, because everywhere's experienced this is a slightly different timetable. Were you, Leanne, feeling the impact of this before maybe your corporate was, or was it aligned?
No, it was really interesting actually. So for me it was March as well, but I remember it clearly. It was March the 17th that I stood in front of the team in the office and said, we're going to be working from home. It'll be a month, maybe 2. We'll be back. We'll all see each other again. And clearly we're all still working from home, 6 months down the track.
Yep.
But at every step along the way, we've been in communication across the regions because, like my colleagues sitting here, we've had the China group that had already been through it. They'd been through the experiences. They'd had to implement an awful lot of, initiatives with how to respond quickly. And then it slowly seemed to start to move down into Australia and then up into the Southeast Asia and then up into Europe, etc. onwards. So at some point in time, for a long time, I think that's probably why we're all feeling a bit tired and looking forward to some holidays at the end of the year, is that it has been going on for an awful long length of time. And I keep talking about the fact that we as leaders have been running at such a pace. We've fundamentally been running on adrenaline for 6 months. When it really hit us and hit us hard, to that point we were looking about how do we care for our people, how do we ensure, how do we interpret the current landscape, how do we make sure that our owners are going along on the journey with us, how do we create new platforms for the industry to ensure that the customers are feeling secure. It's just relentless is probably a good word to describe it.
Yeah, I've started writing a list of stakeholders, but it's actually for you all, but it was too long, so I won't go through it. Sean, when did it become clear, and I have, through dealing with your team, some visibility on when cuts come in and when people really start to feel the pinch. When did it become clear, Sean, both at a corporate and a property level, that people were going to need to be kind of stood down either on a day-a-week basis or more permanently?
Yeah, on the China piece, it's interesting. We've got over 400 hotels in China, and there was a time when I think it was probably late February where they started to close. We ended up in a situation where nearly all of our hotels were closed. Fast forward that tape to last month and 66% occupancy in Greater China, and I didn't think we'll be sitting here and celebrating 66%, but wouldn't it be nice to be in that position down here in ANZP? So I think China was the first, and I think they've just about solved it. They're certainly on the road to recovery, and the recovery plans are working. But I go back to your question. I would say that probably we had a fairly good line of sight to the fact that we're going to have to make some changes, and it really was that casual workforce that was stood down first, and then we had to go into leave without pay provisions, and then JobKeeper and everything else came after that. But I would say March we had a pretty good idea that things were going to take a turn for the worse.
And that's corporate office as well as on property.
Yeah, we put leave without pay provisions in pretty quickly. We acted, I think pretty quickly. We engaged with owners as well because at the end of the day it's their money, and we also took on paying above property as well as on property. I think that was the right thing to do.
Yeah. Moving to Mark. Mark, 2020, great year for you to step into your first senior leadership role. We're hoping your year-on-year 2021 and 2022 figures look spectacular. Not the environment you expected. What's been the hardest aspect of this for you, kind of the learning curve and then having to kind of implement the strategy locally?
Look, it's a good question. Firstly, I'm extremely well supported out of Singapore, but I think one of the saving graces for me is having someone like Peter Tudhope in the market. He's been the one constant factor for Radisson for the last 15 years. So, Peter said to me early on on the piece that if you can survive this, you'll be able to survive anything. So, Peter and I catch up regularly, and he's a great sounding board for me, especially from the operations perspective, and keeping me up to date with what's going on within the hotels themselves.
Yep.
Most challenging is the people aspect. There's no doubt about it. We've grown our development team during this pandemic because we had a strategy in place that we were going to announce at AHICE earlier this year, but it's been delayed by 12 months. But we thought, here's an opportunity to still grow, and let's bring these guys on board. Bring them on board, have the first conversation. You have corporate-wide pay cuts. This is it. We're moving to a 4-day working week. We moved early, which is great, and I think that's helped us from corporate-wide cash flow perspective. We made those cuts early on. And then secondly, those people, whilst performing, you've got to extend their probations, and you have to leave you have to leave every option available to you if this heads south even further. So, managing people's expectations. We went through the quarantine business at the Radisson Blu, which we saw a great piece of business and very supportive of the government and keeping that business alive. But I think you start to see the people fall away, and there's some tenured people there that are now retiring and leaving. And they probably brought those, decisions forward years because, we don't know what's going to happen.
Yep.
And, whilst they'll be missed, you can understand why these decisions are being made. So for me, it's all about the people and getting those decisions right and being empathetic.
Confronting. The communication was always going to be a key part of this, and you can stick your head down, bum up, and get on with the job. But if you're not sharing the information at the right time and the stories with the stakeholders that I mentioned, then people are going to feel in the dark. And the owners panel early was maybe a little nice to you guys. I don't doubt that the stress is shared. There's no question, and none of us are having a party at the moment. You've had that internal stress of restructuring a workforce and having responsibility for operating all of these assets in what is an incredibly fast-paced environment, dealing with health situation, regulatory changes, and then the expectations of your shareholders and reports. But what are the communications you've had back from your owners around their expectations of your management and leadership through this process?
There you go.
I'm sure. pick as an example your most direct owner.
No, look, it was quite funny. COVID has not been combative. Peak periods that we saw for the last 5 years, where you could argue, we were setting budgets at 10%. Growth every year on year, and everyone was full as a goog. COVID didn't have that. I thought it would. I thought the first couple of months it would be more complex with owners, but it was such, as I said before, it was such chaos that everyone needed each other. And I think at the same time, I think the hotel sector in this part of the world is very genuine. I think all the operators are very transparent. I think all the operators give really good value for money. The agreements are very aligned to owners' needs, and everyone operates very closely with owners. So it wasn't a very hard or large chasm to sort of gap to sit with an owner. And then when you're fighting for survival, both operator and owner, you don't really have much time for conflict. It's not going to serve any purpose. So we approached it like that, and I'm sure all my colleagues would have done exactly the same and have done exactly the same. So I think the sector has done a very good job in sitting with owners and caring for them and getting them through. But it was, I guess in summary, the communication just you needed to find centre, and then you needed to be authentic and pretty pragmatic about that and do what you can do.
Yeah, I mean, we've just a little snapshot from us. We've terminated 2 management deals during the course of this, but between the 4 of you, we've signed 6 or 7. So that gives you, not a great data pool, but it gives you a sense of kind of where actually the activity bias is, and it's very much on development and the future. Sean, I mean, I'm conscious part of what we're able to do today is share the reality of the challenge. All of us are keen to be optimistic, I think, but there's no question that today's a platform to explain how confronting this is for some of our properties and states and territories. Sean, how stretched are some of the markets? I mean, how kind of graphic is the impact on an ongoing basis of border closures, lack of corporate, uncertainty around the health situation?
Yeah, I think, it's a mixed bag. We're seeing regional centres doing incredibly well. Interstate travel is the new catch cry. But I think until borders reopen and people feel safe to travel, there's going to be government intervention, and that's going to be a hurdle, right? So it's interesting, the question, because we're all starting to go into the 2021 budget process, right? And it's difficult in a stable, store-on-store year or comp hotels to get it right. Especially across, jurisdictions like the Pacific Islands, and where we have inclement weather and all sorts of things happening. And now with COVID, it's really, the married approach is we've got a phased approach quarter by quarter. And I think the staycation, interstate travel piece will continue through to the end of the year. That's my read. And we'll see strong domestic tourism rebound Q1. But I don't think, let me say this, hopefully we'll see a trans-Tasman bubble in play by Q2. When you consider that the Aussies and Kiwis have 11 to 12 million trips a year annually out of this part of the world and spend between $50 and $60 billion, I think it would be nice if we could redirect that spend back into our part of the world. And I think when those green lanes of travel come into play, it will happen. I think long haul, we're not going to see it. Certainly not in the first half of next year. The optimists would say H2, and you've had many people speak today, talk about a 24, 36-month play to get things back to normal.
But with looking at some of the comments around kind of capital and knowing where some of the owners will be with their debt requirements, their reporting requirements, their lease obligations, I'm sure some of you are not being paid full fees. There's no question that there's ongoing, on some of your deals, there's ongoing pain. Interest rate travel is not enough, is it? Or it's not enough without substantial additional government help.
Correct.
That's the sense. I mean, I think, want to talk about some of the efficiencies that have been found and kind of what you're able to do with limited occupancy, but with JobKeeper.
Yeah.
Leanne, what are the kind of the new efficiencies that have been found to try and find a way to make the numbers look something
palpable.
Like kind of
palpable? Yeah, one of the first things that we did, and you heard from some of the asset managers and the owners earlier, was work with them closely to turn around and determine how we could actually create an environment and a level of platform for service to deliver to the guest expectations, as well as trying to get to a break-even point across the hotels, and that's a very, very fine line. Guests when they're, and we're really, really struggling in some areas to do that, because guests have been locked down for an extraordinary amount of time. They're being let out and they're going to their hotel. They're walking in the door to this amazing branded hotel and they're going, fantastic, I want my full service buffet breakfast. And they walk in the door and I want my room service and I want everything to the standards that I expect, because I'm paying X amount of dollars. And that's a really hard call. What's that fine line that you turn around, and what service levels do you deliver? What breakfast products do you deliver? How do you get to that point where we can work with the owners to get to that break-even component? And one thing we keep saying is, as we came into this pandemic, how we came into it, we can't come out of it in the same way that we did. And that means sitting down with them, working out how we set up our departments differently. Is there opportunities to job share? Is there opportunities to, cross-utilise departments? Can we outsource? Can we offshore? All of those things have to be looked at now, and looked at incredibly differently that we've never done before. And let's face it, we've been a fairly traditional segment and sector for a very, very long time. And we can't be that way anymore. So, we have to get to a point. And the conversations at the GM's levels have now changed, where previously it was all predominantly about service and operations, etc. Now it is, what do we need to do to deliver cash flow to our owners? Yeah. And that's the critical piece.
Let's touch on Victoria very quickly. Mark, how critical is an improvement in the government, or an enhancement of the government response in Victoria? Because it's clear now, it's not just impacting Victoria, it's clearly impacting domestic business across the country. And I think there's a raising level of commentary and volume around that. How critical is an enhanced position from Victoria over the next month or two?
Look, I think before this second wave hit, you started to see some green shoots in corporate travel between Melbourne and Sydney. So, whilst it wasn't much, it was something. This second wave and the impact it's had on our industry and the bad press we've got it's been pretty poor. And I think, hats off to AAOA and TAA for the way they've handled that and their messaging to the broader community. But with Victoria, it's a long process that they've, a roadmap that they've outlined on Sunday, and watching that press conference, you just thought, wow, when is this ever going to end?
0 cases for 28 days.
Correct. And my biggest concern, and I shared this conversation with many people over the last few months, is when have we moved from, the whole country locks down, we flatten the curve, we prepare our medical system in preparation for what could come, to now full-on eradication. And I don't understand. This is across to humans now. We have to live with this. And I think New South Wales, Sydney in particular, is setting the gold standard in how you live with this, how you trace. We can have an event like this. We can go to a restaurant. We can sign in. I think Victoria have to, it's not putting our head in the sand and saying, this is serious. We know that. But what do you need to do to just start opening up sooner rather than later?
A few months ago, someone was playing Green Day, wake me up when September comes.
Yeah.
And it looked like we might be in a better place, but we're not quite there yet. With the National Cabinet targeting Christmas, you could have laughed at that, that's right. National Cabinet targeting Christmas for a more solid return. Let's move quickly and talk about some of the good stuff, because I think in many ways it's puzzling that there is such continued growth in this environment, but it's there and it's deep, and it's not one or two of you, it's all of you and your other competitors. Sean, you've got a record year of openings coming up. I'll say it so you don't have to. You've got a significant pipeline. What are you doing to chase growth at the moment? Has that come off the priority list at all, or is it still right up there?
No, I was just chatting with Richard, our head of development. He's in Queensland with me, and we're very bullish about growth. Certainly in the medium to long term, and I'll discuss this with some of the other members of the panel. I think we're aligned that hotels as an asset class are still very desirable. If you believe the sun will come up tomorrow and the world will still turn, this shall come to pass. And I think that hotels as an asset class are still desirable versus maybe other parts of the world where they're not really so much in vogue. So yeah, we've got some great openings coming up. We're excited about it. We're conscious of the fact that we need to deliver for our owners. I think the human part of it is it'll deliver a lot of jobs. Even for those folks of ours that have been displaced, which we're going to prioritise and rehiring in the new openings. I think we've got 8 to open in the next 18 months. And most of them are capped off, and including Ritz-Carltons and W's and luxury collections. So a little bit skewed towards the higher end of the business. But we also have some great lifestyle and select service brands coming into play, like Moxie. As you know, we've got Moxie's now signed in Australia and New Zealand, so that's exciting for us. And
I think there are some interesting, as part of the shift, some interesting brands that have been coming into the marketplace that do create a point of difference. Simon, we've worked. Neither announced, I think, yet, but one really interesting one in Sydney, one really interesting one in southern Queensland, both new brands to the market. That's got to be exciting for you and a development for the platform.
Yeah, look, I think the thematic going into COVID was that the Pacific region was sort of ready for luxury, and sort of it had been building over the last 4 to 5 years particularly, and there was a genuine return, and I think that has been amplified, in fact. So I think, again, all the operators will be having a similar view on the luxury brands coming into the market and putting a strength to the sector. And then also lifestyle. It's a very buoyant sector in terms of an asset class, as was noted. And I think it will continue to be so. I mean, the one fundamental that's going to be very true relevant to our safety and our strong economic circumstances, which we sit very well positioned, is post-2008, when we had the same experience post-GFC. The amount of Middle Eastern capital entered the market for the first time, and then I think European capital doubled down and has stayed here ever since. And I think this region has got a flow of capital coming from international markets that is ready to come. And it's not on a wish, it's just that there are a number of other countries that have been crossed off the list, and we haven't been, and we'll sit very strongly. So I think that supports those brands as well.
That's consistent with kind of the visibility we're getting. Leanne, you've just reopened Hayman today, and you've got a strong pipeline, no doubt, as well. You manage a couple of assets in the Pacific. What very quickly, because Howard's giving us the wind up, I think there's a mega strategic opportunity for Australia and New Zealand to play a bigger role in the Pacific. Yes. Or take back a bit of a role that we might have overlooked in the last few years. How critical is Aussie and New Zealand business to those Pacific economies and assets?
Oh, incredibly. I mean, they make up such a substantial part of the business that goes into it. I mean, the opportunity up there is quite phenomenal. I sound like Simon. I sound like Sean. We've just signed the Grand Pacific Hotel in Fiji, right? And which is going to get rebranded across to an Intercontinental. Great asset, great opportunity, and there's multiple others up there in the island. So I think, if we continue to focus on that Pacific region, we'll see some really good fruition come across the board.
Good, strong. Thank you. Final, one more. Mark, have you got any advice for these youngsters on the rest of the panel on how they should kind of position themselves going forward?
No, I don't. I turned 40 this year, so maybe that's what's happened to the world.
Oh, happy 40th birthday. A round of applause.
No, it's look, it's a great experience. It's a great industry, and people on this panel I've spoken to before moving into these sort of roles, and even on the owner side. So, I think one thing about this industry is there's people to talk to, and whether you're a competitor or not, you can speak, and you can get good guidance and counsel from others.
They're not a bad bunch.
Yeah.
Very good. That's us out of time. Sean, thanks ever so much. Enjoy sunny Queensland. Lovely spring day here in Sydney, by the way. You are missing out. Simon, Leanne, Mark, thanks a lot. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Well done. Well done. Thanks, Robert. You really do feel the industry working together on this, don't you? Really a good feel. We're going to finish today with an award that was chosen through the Design In symposium process. Paul Davis was a personal friend of mine. He died too young. I'm going to hand over to his colleagues in a moment, but he was an extraordinary, he was an architect by trade. He brought terrific realism into a hotel project where he could see things to save money, but also knew how to work with people, designers. I really could go on about him, but I'll probably choke up. Leonie, can you bring your group up, please? Leonie Lorimer was the chief judge of this award. And joining her, we have Pro-Invest people, Tim Sherlock, Tim, and Jan Smets, Deputy Chair of Pro-Invest.
Hi, Howard.
So thanks for being here. I know you all knew Paul very well, as I did. I'm just going to hand over to Leonie to describe the process and what happens. Thank you.
Thanks.
Right, well, this year we had a tremendous number of entries and fantastic quality. And tonight we have people who've submitted for the award in the room, and we also have them virtually connected in as well. So I think this is the first sort of hybrid yay that we've been able to do. The criteria for selection were design concept, functionality of course, also the way that the designers worked across disciplines, because you'll all know that design in hotels takes many, many disciplines, sustainability, and the last criteria was what the guests thought. So we look at social media and all those sorts of things. But I'd like to ask the sponsors to explain why they sponsor this award.
Thanks, Ernie. So Paul joined us in 2014, and he had as Howard said, had a real passion for hotels and spent his life in the hotel industry, and he tragically passed away in 2018. So this was a really good opportunity to ensure that his name lived on in the industry. He's dearly missed within our group and everywhere. So yeah, on that note.
So what you're seeing scrolling through now are the shortlisted submissions. And I think you'll see that they range between large-scale inner-city projects to rural retreats, you know, all sorts of different things. And today, I think it's interesting that we've been talking about some of the trends, and some of the trends that have been discussed today are actually represented in these awards. So I'm not quite sure how we're going to do this, but we're going to try and do it a little bit like Hollywood. We're going to open the runner up first, the envelope. I'm going to, I think if you're in the room or if you're online, we're going to either get you to stand up or cross to you. I'm going to then tell you why the jury, and by the way, the jury was myself, Paul West from Singapore, and also Joseph Pang, who does a lot of best work. So, but did not submit, say that. So
okay.
We'll try and make this smooth.
Okay, so the runner-up?
Runner-up is?
The runner-up is The Games House by Lucas Partners.
So,
wow.
Now,
here's the...
Oh, here we go.
Yes. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
So now that is Kaz Makahan. And with the Zagame House, it's a fascinating project because it's an urban inner city Melbourne motel. So the rooms themselves, I think that Lucas Partners have been quite innovative and flipped them so that the bathroom is actually on the window. What this has done is create a tremendous amount of space. I think the design of the rooms themselves is, it's a little bit like a home away from home. And then if you come down to the street and the public areas, they're totally connected in with the community around. So one big open plan bar, restaurant and cafe, all facing the street, connecting with the neighbourhood. So congratulations to Kaz Makahan from Lucas Partners.
Thank you.
Let me show your certificate. There we go. There's the certificate which we're going to get out to you.
He's on its way to you.
All right, that worked okay. I think we can do that again.
Yeah, I think so. Good evening, everyone. So the winner is Stillwater 7 by Cumulus Studio, and special congratulations to Todd Henderson, sorry.
So,
there he is. Hi,
so here's Todd Henderson from Cumulus Studios from Launceston in Tasmania. Now this project is, we thought fantastic, because if you can imagine an old flour mill that's 190 years old, that's been burnt out twice, you'd think, well, you'd just bowl it over, wouldn't you? But through persistence and complicated fire engineering, Cumulus has inserted 7 luxury suites into this structure and contrasted a rich colour palette with the charred timbers of the original structure. So I'd like you all to congratulate Todd Henderson and Cumulus Studio. There'll be a certificate coming. Oh, no, there we go. Here's the award.
Here's the award. Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right,
That's fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well done.
No problem.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join us for a drink now. The Intercontinental Hotel Group is inviting us all for drinks downstairs, I believe, Sailmaker. See you there. Sorry, Chris, I should know this. See you down there. Thanks for today. See you tomorrow morning. Thank you.